Say again, we appreciate everybody being here. Good to see everybody who's come out tonight. We're looking forward again to the study. And we've, of course, been looking at the covenants. Primarily, though, we've been looking toward the promise, which we've talked about the idea of the covenant, the promise. The covenant, of course, being where that God deals with mankind and says, I will do this if, and it's conditional, if you will do this. So we, of course, in a general covenant, that would be both sides would have to make agreements and both sides would have expectations, and it is that way in the covenant we're talking about with God. But of course we know it being God, He cannot fail. He will do His part of the covenant. But a covenant relationship is one where we have a specific responsibility. The promise, on the other hand, is where that all of the weight of responsibility is on God. It is not dependent on me. It is not dependent on what I do, how I do, or if I can do. It is all dependent on God. And we've been looking at that and sort of trying to consider those ideas. And in doing that, we had some questions come up at the end last week. And it was in Genesis 13 and then in Genesis 12. And if I am correct, and you help me if I'm misstating this, in Genesis 13, we had looked at it and talked about it being the promise, but back in Genesis 12, it was talking about it being a covenant. And the question was, when he was called, was this a covenant? Was this a promise? And it seemed like part of the promise was attached to the idea that Abraham went out from Ur of the Chaldees. So it's almost like, is that a covenant or a promise? Am I stating this right? Okay. All right. So to answer that question, we're not going to read Genesis 12 or 13. That's what y'all expected, right? I want to go to Genesis 15. And this actually leads right into probably where we'd have been tonight anyway. And then we'll come back to those in a few minutes, or probably we'll answer the question through some of these things. So, and at the end, if I haven't answered the question to your satisfaction, you holler at me. Okay? All right. So, I want to go to Genesis 15. Now, remember, we're still dealing with Abraham, or Abram. We're still, he's been called out of Ur of the Chaldees. There's a couple of occasions where this promise of a child has been made to him. There is a relationship that is starting to be formed between him and God, and there is some covenant relationship there as well. Okay? But there's several things that have been going on. Lot and he have already parted ways. He's had the war where that Lot, along with a lot of the others there in Sodom and Gomorrah, were carried away captive, and Abram armed his men, went after them, delivered them. And that's what's in chapter 14. But then at the end of the 14th chapter is where he comes in contact with Melchizedek. And we may get into that, probably not tonight, but we may get back to that. So we're doing a lot with Abraham, I know. But I think Abraham's real good to get the concepts in front of us so that we understand what we're looking at. But I want to pick up in chapter 15. And we have, in previous studies, I believe both of them that we've done here went over these scriptures. But I want to go over them again because I think you can have the same scripture, and I'm certain we went over this when we were talking about the redemption that was in Christ. I'm almost certain we went over it last year when we were talking about the baptism of the Lord's Supper. So but I'm not 100% sure about last year, but I know we did the first year. But nevertheless, just because you go over something to prove a point doesn't mean that you can't go over the same verses to prove something even more. Okay? So, chapter 15, it says, After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eleazar of Damascus. Now, Abram is asking the Lord, you've called me out of Ur of the Chaldees. I've went, I've done. You've made this promise to me. I still don't have a child. Okay? And from all appearance, it appears that my steward, my servant, the head steward, the head servant, I guess you would say, is going to be the one that's going to get everything I have. And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir, meaning Eleazar. And the idea here is that, Lord, you've promised me this, but here we are, and if you look at the time frame, probably mid-80s, Abram is now at this time. And I'm just sort of quick running through some of that based on Ishmael's age, and maybe even closer to 90. But
I wrote down 85 right here.
Okay.
Just says a note after the year.
I was thinking mid-80s because I'm thinking Ishmael was in his mid-teens when Isaac was born. And we know he was about 100 when Isaac was born, or when he was conceived. So, you know, we're somewhere in the mid-80s here for Abram's age. So you can understand why he's like, you know, Lord, I've done all these things that you've asked me, and yet we're still at this same place. Okay? And he said, Behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And I'm going to share this thought with y'all, and this is really not directly what we're dealing with here tonight, but it just sure seems to be a thought that's worthwhile. God has been promising this since he left Ur of the Chaldees, that he's going to bless him, that he's going to make of him a great nation, that he's going to give him a seed, a promised seed. I don't know that Abram, when he first started out, really understood what that meant. He may have, I don't know. The Bible's just not that expressly clear that whether he knew that this meant the promised Messiah. But he knew that God had said, I'll bless you, I'll make a great nation of you, multitudes of people will come from you, all these things. And he's looking for that. I mean, he's been looking for that for a number of years already now. And every time we find in here where God's dealing with him, where God's talking to him, God's saying, I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to give you a son. So he's heard this again and again and again and again, and yet he's 85 years old and it still hasn't happened. So he comes back again and he says, God, you know, and it just occurs to me that it's a worthwhile thought for us. Be not weary in well doing. You shall reap if you faint not. You know, that just seems to fit right there, doesn't it, with Abraham. But anyway, that's just a little quick side thought. But the Lord makes promise to him again. He says, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. Now, I said promise right there. But in all honesty, you also see in that verse some of the hallmarks of the idea of a covenant as well. Because there is a promise on the part of God that God's going to give him a son. Because really, if he's 85, he's probably pretty well past, you know, in our way of thinking. Now, back then, they lived to be quite a bit older. They had children quite a bit older. But we're still right at the edge, if you will, of him being able, from a natural standpoint, to have a child. So but God is still telling him, if you'll believe me, I'll perform. Okay? So there's some attribute of this where Abraham actually has a part in it. He has to believe God. That in and of itself does, it meets at least the bare minimum of the idea of a covenant. Does that make sense? So, and I want y'all to start seeing things that way, because a lot of times when we're talking about the distinction between a covenant and a promise, really about the only way we can come to a final conclusion is the end result. Because a lot of times they're so intertwined here, okay? Because keep in mind that God's saying, you know, if you will, and that's a big word, the one that's going to come forth from your own bowels, that's the heir. But that heir is the future of the promise, okay? So just sometimes these just sort of weave in and out. And don't let that bother you. That's not a problem. And as we get further into this, you'll see why. But he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, so shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Okay? So here's God saying, this is what I'm going to do. Not only are you going to have a child, but look at the stars. Number them if you can. And I guess there's people now that can to an extent. But every time they get a stronger telescope, you know what they do? They find more on out there. So for Abraham to honestly say he could number the stars would have been an impossibility, because there were things on past that were there that he could not see at this point, which is, a lot of times the way we live our lives. But again, that's just a little quick side note there. But he said, tell the stars that thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. Now keep in mind, this seed, this is singular. Okay? And we've already went over that and pointed out that this seed is Christ. And that's to whom the promises were made. To Abraham and his seed, singular, which is Christ. Okay? So keep reading with me. And he says, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Now, I do not believe that this is when Abraham got saved. I believe the man was already saved. There's not I think somewhere down in Ur of the Chaldees, he had a under the fig tree moment. I don't know where it was, doesn't say, but when God calls a man to go out and do like he called Abraham to do, I can't see that as being an unsaved individual. I just don't see that God leads lost people that way. So, anyway, he said unto him, I'm sorry, I said all that and then skipped over what I meant to say. He believed the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. That faith that he had was counted as righteousness. Okay? And y'all will find over in the New Testament that that's an important point. And probably one we'll get to before the study's over and look at it a little bit more. But Abraham believed God. But he believed God being a saved person, and God counted that as righteousness to him. Not saving righteousness, saving faith, but righteousness, which is according to faith. In other words, he just believed God, and God was pleased with it and blessed him and counted it as a righteous act on his part. Just that, believing God. Okay?
He had a, I believe, but help my unbelief moment.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, when God's standing there and he says, I'm going to do it, what are you going to say? No, you're not. I mean, that's what a lot of us do, but I mean, no. Yeah. All right, so he said, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. Now, this inheritance of the land, that's leaning back more towards the covenant relationship, okay? Because that is what follows on down, that you see that is extended down to Isaac, that's extended down to Jacob, that's extended down to, of course, Jacob being Israel, the 12 tribes. That's the promise they carried with them off into Egypt. It was Joseph, I believe, that said, God will visit you. And when he does, you carry my bones up. I mean, you talk about believing. And he knew it was 400 years. We're going to find out how he knew that in this same chapter. But he knew. He believed God. And he said, I'm going to die here. He said, but y'all carry my bones back. Okay? So he said, and I'm going to give this land to you to inherit it. That deals with the covenant. Okay? Because that's a secular thing. That's a natural thing. That's not what we're dealing with a promise. Okay? And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Okay, so what question is he asking right here? And this will help us start distinguishing some. When he asks this of the Lord, what is he asking about? That's an open-ended question. I know it's not very detailed, but what is he asking about? If I give you two options, can you pick which one he's dealing with? Okay, is he talking about the seed, or is he talking about the land?
Land?
Exactly. Okay, how will I know that I will inherit it? Okay, remember when he was talking about the seed back here in verse 5, well, he believed the Lord and he counted it to him for righteousness. That's a done deal, right?
Well, why did he believe it then?
Well, I mean, there's two different things that he's dealing with.
I know.
Okay.
The Lord told him straight out that he's going to.
But there's two different things he's dealing with. Okay?
There's still an
Stay
if on
with
the
me.
land.
Stay with me on this, okay?
All right.
Because this will help you. He starts out with the seed. That's Christ. And he just believed him. Okay? There's people all around that when they hear about Jesus, you know what they do? They believe it. And I believe they believe it from their heart. Saved people. Okay? Now, I don't think that right here he's talking about getting saved. Okay? I made that clear.
Yeah.
But that picture is laid out there. That is believing the promise. The promise is not dependent on Abraham. The promise is dependent on God.
Yeah.
God doesn't say, Abraham, if you'll do all this other stuff, then I'll do it. No, he said, I'll do it. Okay? But now we're getting into things that are dealing with the covenant, which means Abraham's got a part in it as well. Okay? So when you ask why didn't he believe it, well, he's in the middle of the land of Canaan that even after 400 years when Egypt had been in Egypt, they came out with the wealth of Egypt, were hardened for 40 years and strengthened. All the unbelieving people died in the wilderness. They still had a hard time when they went in, even following the Lord, to overcome all of that land. And if you really look at what happened when they went into the land, there were still Canaanites.
Yeah.
There were still Jebusites. There were still Perizzites that were hidden in and among them. They did occupy the whole land, but there were still people in and among them that were a problem. So from a natural standpoint, when Abraham's looking at this, he is himself and however many servants he has, no children, even though he believed they were coming, but they're not there yet. And then the Lord's saying, you're going to have all this land. I can understand why he might have had a little hesitation there. I mean, I'm human, you're human, just everybody else is human too. And there is a distinction between us believing the promise of God, which is wholly dependent on God, and us believing that we can do what God expects us to do. People don't have a problem with saying, I believe God will save anybody that will come to Him the right way. I've heard that in our churches, and I think the people absolutely believe it. But the same God is the one that promises that if you'll walk with me, you can be counted worthy to walk with me in white.
Yeah.
And you start asking people about that, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can do that. I just don't know. I just know. You just don't know me.
I,
If you believe God, you believe God. Okay?
I've got something I want to ask.
Okay.
Okay, now, and I believe that you're right on that seed being Christ.
Yeah.
But can't that seed also be plural? Not this one.
Plural.
Yeah,
Well,
seed, he said, thy seed, he's talking about many.
there is, and this is the distinction between, and that's what we're going to get into as we finish this on down.
Yeah.
As we finish this on down.
Yeah,
Okay? Because I understand the question that you're asking. Can you hold it for just a
Yeah.
second? Okay, all right. So, let's read on down. And he said unto him, he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit? And he said unto him, take an heifer of 3 years, and a she-goat of 3 years, and a ram of 3 years, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece on, or one against another, but the birds divided he not. So he took the heifer, as I understand it, he split her down the middle, laid it out. Okay? Did the same thing with the she-goat, did the same thing with the ram, the turtle dove, and the young pigeon he did not. But he sacrificed these, killed them, laid them out there before the Lord. This is a sacrifice, okay? Because that's what God asked him. Now, when you start talking about a sacrifice always is going to point towards Christ. Okay? Regardless of what type it is, how we want to debate it, how we want to figure out what the details of it are, they all point towards Christ, which is the perfect sacrifice. Okay? So that goes back to the seed. Okay? So it says that he divided the birds not, and then we pick up in verse 11, it says, and when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Now these are birds of carrion. These are eagles, vultures, any kind of, they're unclean birds. Birds that will eat carrion. Okay, dead animals. That's what we're talking about here. That's what's coming down, and these are later on when we get into the laws of the the Old Covenant. They're considered unclean birds. They're not fit for consumption. Okay, so they were unclean birds that were trying to stop what was going on here. Okay, because God has said, I'm going to show you how you will know this. Here's the assurity of what I am telling you. But you have to do this first. You have to do this sacrifice. Well, the birds come in to try to take that away, to hinder, to cause it to... Okay, I think about the parable of the sower. Okay? One of the situations that happened was they sowed the seed, and before it could sprout up good, the birds came and carried it away, right? That it did not sprout up, that it did not bring forth. Okay, you get the same picture. It's trying to stop it. Okay, and what's trying to be stopped is the answer of God to Abraham, the assurity to Abraham of what God is going to do. So let's go a little bit further. Abraham drove them away. So Abraham did what he could do. All right? And anytime we're dealing with a covenant, there's something you're supposed to do. And you can do as much as you can do. And I believe that's exactly what Abraham did. Okay? Now, what time this all began, I have no idea. Okay? But it was during the day, evidently, because now, in the next verse, it says, and when the sun was going down, so it's come to the end of the day, it says a deep sleep fell upon Abram. What I see in that is Abram had went as far as Abram could go. He has exhausted his ability. He has laid out the sacrifice the way God said. He's kept these birds off of it to keep it there so that he can get the answer from God. And he's went just as far as he can go, and the sun's went down, and he can't go no further. The exhaustion overtakes him, his inability, his weakness overtakes him, and he can go no further. Okay? And it says, lo, and horror of great darkness fell upon him. Okay? Now, I'm not right now going to read this, but I think that equates to what you're going to find over in the book of Revelations. When John saw that book that was written within and on the backside sealed with 7 seals, and he wept much because there was no man found worthy to take it. Okay? Abraham sees this covenant relationship, this promise that God is making that he's going to give him all these things, failing because Abraham couldn't keep his part of it. He couldn't go far enough to get the answer. He couldn't do enough to do it. Okay? Keep going. When this horror of great darkness fell upon him, and he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed, which is the promise, shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. So Joe, here's your answer. Absolutely, it's more than just one.
Yeah.
Okay?
I wasn't
But-
arguing about Christ, that
No.
seed being Christ.
But understand that all of this is about Christ.
Yeah, I
Okay.
know that.
And what God is fixing to show Abraham here is not only Christ, but how we're even going to get to Christ.
Yeah.
Okay? So, he said, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs. He's talking about Egypt. And shall serve them. We find that they went down free, but they quickly became slaves. Okay? And they shall they shall afflict them for 400 years. So we have a time frame. Okay? And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. I'm not going to take the time to turn over there, but we know the story, right? I mean, at the right time, which is about 400 years here, Moses went down, and by the time the plagues were were over, the Egyptians were breaking off their earrings, taking their gold, and giving it to them and saying, get out of here. Leave. Go now. They wanted no more. Right? So they went out with the wealth of Egypt. Just like God had said. Okay? He said, and thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, thou shalt be buried in a good old age, but in the 4th generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So, again, he's telling him, they're going to go, but when the time is right, then I'm going to bring them back here, which we know is exactly what he did, right? And he said, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. I think there is a whole lot of things that God is dealing with that we've never even seen yet. Okay, so he's telling Abraham, here before Isaac's ever born, that your children, your descendants aren't ready to come back here till this time, because at this time I'm going to deal with the Amorites because their iniquity will be full. That's what you get when you got a God that can declare the end from the beginning. Okay? So, and it shall come, and it came to pass that when the sun went down, so again, it's dark, which is the very next part of this. And it was dark. Behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. Now, when we talk about a burning lamp, I'm going to start with it and then we'll back up to the other. When we talk about a burning lamp, what do y'all think about? I mean, where does your mind go? If I said, was there a burning lamp later on in the Old Covenant relationship anywhere? Is there anything there?
In the tabernacle and the temple, there's a
Yeah.
lamp.
Yeah. And is that defined for us then in the New Testament, telling us specifically without any question what that is at the end of the 1st chapter of Revelations? It's the church. The 7 candlesticks, which thou sawest, are the 7 churches. And it was also called a candlestick in the tabernacle. But when you read it, what it was, and we think of a candlestick as just, a hunk of wood with a wax candle sitting on top of it. Okay? What it means, though, is a lamp. All right? Because if you go back and you look at the candlestick that was in the tabernacle, it had branches that came up, it had bowls. And then there was a place for a wick. Okay, that's just like we would think of as a coal oil lamp, not probably in the same shape, but the same function. There was specific rules of how that they would get the oil from the olives to put in it, and that's what burned. There was a whole course of the priesthood that their job was to go in there and clean it, make sure the wicks were set, make sure that everything was taken care of. Okay? That's the candlestick. All right? And again, in Revelations 1 and I think verse 21, it said the 7 golden candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. Okay? So, way back here, when God is dealing with Abraham, it says that right in the midst of this sacrifice that he's made, to be able to get an answer about something very, very specific about the inheritance of the land, okay? God comes up and he says, here's a burning lamp, which is the church, which is representative of the new covenant relationship. Okay? The other thing that went through was a smoking furnace. Let's go to Exodus. Exodus chapter 19. And in the 19th chapter of Exodus, they are at Mount Sinai. I'm going to pick up in verse 16. Okay, this is the children of Israel. They're out of bondage. They're coming to Sinai to receive the law. And it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace. And the whole mount quaked greatly. Now it is at Sinai, and right here more specifically, and very shortly after this, that God establishes the full covenant with the people of Israel, and they enter into the covenant relationship with Him. And you will find Mount Sinai is always what they reference back to when they start talking about the law and they start talking about that covenant relationship, because that's where it was established. That's where God brought them to do it. Okay? So, going back over here to the 15th chapter now. It was dark. Behold, here comes a smoking furnace, which is the old covenant. And a burning lamp, which is the new covenant, that passed between those pieces. Those pieces were laid out to get the answer, to get the response from God about what is going to take place. Okay? And what God is showing Abram, all right, and I want to pause right there before we get into the next verse. What God has just shown Abram is this is how I'm going to do what I mean to do. Okay? Because the promise that what we're looking for is the Messiah. It is Jesus. Okay? But it's not just stopping with Christ coming here, but Him fulfilling all that He is supposed to do. Right? That is part of His work. The Bible says that He came to save lost humanity. We know that He shed His blood for that cause. But what else did He shed His blood for?
Church.
Oh, okay. So God is telling Abraham, before Isaac's even born, which is the child of promise, this is what I'm going to do. And that is a promise But you'll notice how that it winds in and out of something. Okay? And what it winds in and out of is the old covenant relationship. And the very next verse, we find that God's making a covenant with Abraham. Okay? But it winds in and out through the old covenant, and it brings us up to and into the new covenant relationship. All right? So God is not only showing Abram that Christ is coming, but he's showing him all about how he's going to bring about what he has promised to bring about in Christ. Okay? So when we're talking about an inheritance, yes, there is the inheritance of the land over there, but there is a much greater inheritance to be gathered than just that. Okay? Now, here's where it gets confusing, I think, to a lot of people. But I think if you'll really stop and think about this, it starts to make sense. Okay? All of those things really come back to the promise. Okay? If you don't have the promise, you don't have a new covenant. Because where there is a testament, there must of necessity be the death of the testator. Okay? The New Testament is the new covenant in his blood. We looked at that last year with the Lord's Supper, right? Okay, so you never even get to this if it's not for Christ. And that, I believe, in this life is as full as what God means to do for us. I think in the life to come, all of that gets cleaned up, and it is truly a glorious thing to see. Okay? But that's the epitome of what God is meaning to do through the work of Christ, to bring mankind back into a proper standing with Him, a right standing with Him, not just saved, but in full communion with Him as Adam and Eve were before they fell. Okay? And God is not only telling them, I'm going to do that, and that's the inheritance. That's really the inheritance. Okay? That's the land that we should be concerned about, not Israel. Okay? Israel's a stopping point along the way. Israel is a means to an end. The Old Covenant was a means to an end. The Old Covenant brings about the birth of the Messiah. In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, right? So it's a means to an end. It is to bring about the birth of the Messiah. When the Messiah comes, then the new covenant relationship enters in. And the new covenant relationship carries us off into what God really means for us to be a part of. That perfect reunion, I'm going to put it that way right here, of God and man, and brought back into that perfect state of communion that we should have been in all along, but we fell from. Okay? So that's what God is really telling Abraham right here. Alright?
Can I?
You may.
Paul describes the old law in the covenant as a schoolmaster
To bring us under Christ.
to bring us under Christ. And I've never thought about it, but what does the schoolmaster do?
He teaches you.
He teaches you, and what does he also do? Slaps you and thumps you upside the ear.
Well, not anymore, but
Well, not
they
anymore,
should.
they should.
But
But thumps you in the ear to make you stay in line. And really, that's what the covenant did the entire time.
Exactly.
Was to keep the promise going.
exactly.
So he was a schoolmaster more than just teaching, but also keeping the Israelite people in the direction they needed to go.
Yeah. And if you go back and you actually look at where that is at, that's in the 3rd chapter of Galatians. And the 3rd chapter of Galatians is where we were last week, where it said, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. Okay? So it's the same exact context. We're
Yeah.
dealing with the same thing. We're just coming about it in a different way. Okay? We never got through all of that in Galatians chapter 3. And then he talks about in verse 18, if the inheritance be of the law, it is no more of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise.
Right.
Okay? So he's promised these things to Abraham, and even the inheritance is by promise. Okay? But what is what does the covenant do? Okay? If everything's by promise, what does the covenant do? It's the means that God is going to use to bring about the promise. Okay? So, verse 18. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed, singular, have I given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Kadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaims, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Okay? So, there is a covenant that God makes with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land. Now that is dependent on them possessing the land. That is dependent on them staying with God. And all this is not written there, but that's dependent, okay? Because that does not happen till 400 years from now, which God just told them, okay? That is dependent on them, that is dependent on Abraham performing. And I don't mean that in a rude way, but
Absolutely.
you know, Isaac was not immaculately conceived. Abraham had to go in unto Sarah. Okay? And she conceived. Alright? From that, you go from Abraham to Isaac. From Isaac to Jacob. Again, same thing. This lineage has to continue down. Now, there's occasions in there messed up. But God, because of His mercy and because of the promise, kept it going. Okay? And there's a lot of good thoughts about that as well. So the covenant, God even shores up with the promise. Even though the covenant is to bring about the promise actually shores up the covenant. Okay? And y'all start looking at this, and what you're going to find more and more and more is, as big as it is about the covenants, it's really more about the promise. Okay? Because the covenant always is dealing with us, and we have a part in it, and we always end up messing it up. Even in the days we live. I mean, you know, you think about, for 2,000 years, how many people have been in that true covenant relationship that is in the New Testament, which means that they're saved individuals, they're baptized scripturally, and they are a part of one of the Lord's churches, walking with Him. How many people in the last 2,000 years have let that slide?
Yeah.
I mean, we look at history. David's got the book. Y'all, most of y'all got it and you've read it, and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay? It starts out here, it works its way up, then it jumps over, and it just prospers up here, and then it just comes on down here to where we're at, and then as it's coming down here to where we're at and beginning to flourish here, you see it just dwindling away in behind it. Okay? I mean, they're having, some of our people are back up in Virginia, I think, and doing history tours now, and they're taking our people back to places to show them these places where churches used to be that we came from. They're not there. Something happened. Okay, they failed the covenant. But God's promise is, I'll build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So guess what? It's still here. Because the promise of God, the strength of which is always going to be in Jesus Christ, shores the covenant up and keeps the covenant going. Without that, the covenant would have long since failed. Long since failed. You look at Israel, and if it hadn't been for the mercy and the long suffering of God, how many times did they fail? I mean, they had barely got in the land, and the first generation had died away, and they started after false gods. And they was back and this forth, and this back and this forth, and then, you know, they say, give us a king. I'll get to you in a second, Joe. They'll give us a king, And God had said, you don't need a king, all the way back in the law, back there at Sinai that we just read about, was one of the things, you don't need it. He knew it was coming, because in the same law, he said, when you have a king, he says he's not supposed to multiply unto him wives, right? So Saul messed up because he didn't believe God. David came in. David was a man after God's own heart, even though his flesh sure wasn't. But his heart was, okay? And then Solomon, God gave him great wisdom, so much so that in the latter days, his multiplying wives, which God said don't do, okay, that they turned his heart away from serving the Lord his God, caused the kingdom to split. And it went that way for a number of years until the point that they had brought false gods into the house of God and just abominations beyond anything we can imagine. And God said, I'm done. And he raised up Babylon. He brought them in. He carried them away for 70 years and left them sitting over there, which is not just a happenstance number. They had been in the land at that time for about 490 years. God had told them at the end of every 7th year you are to let the land lay fallow. They never once did it for 490 years. Never once did it. And after that 490 years, he sent them to Babylon. And you know what the land did? It laid fallow for 70 years. He got every one of them back. And then he let them come back. Why? Because they deserved it? Surely not. I mean, they learned their lesson about serving false gods for the most part, but by the time Christ came, y'all know what they had gotten into. It was such a formalized religion that there was nothing to it. You know, there weren't men like Daniel that were in touch with God, that God would bless the way he did. I mean, that was gone. But, you know, God held up his end of it, and he kept the covenant going through the strength of the promise, which is Christ. Okay? Now, Joe, you had a question.
Yes, when Joshua led the people into the promised land, Canaan, they never did really rout all of those people out of there, did
No,
they?
they did not. And it was a source of trouble for them
That's
for
right,
years and
yeah.
years and years and years and years.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely correct. And when you read it, a lot of times it sounds almost like they did. But if you keep reading, you're going to find, well, there was some, and I mean, when you start looking at it on a map, I mean, it was like, you know, Israel was right here strong in Westmoreland, but right over there in Portland, there was a whole bunch of them Jebusites.
Yeah.
You know, and then you go on past that, you get to Robertson County, well, it's back strong Israelites. You know, they were spotted in and out, and it was never,
Why?
it was always a problem because they didn't
do what they were
do
told.
what they were told. Because they failed. Which is what is the weakness of a covenant. You know, that's why Paul argues about things like, if there had been a law given whereby men could have truly been righteous, then it should have been by the law. But he said it wasn't. Because we fail. We cannot live up to the expectation of God.
Yeah.
That's the whole theme of really, I mean, when you get down to it, that's really the whole theme of a covenant. God said, now I'm going to give you a chance here. And we just miserably fail it. You know, he said, here's your test, and we fail it. We bomb it. You know, and again and again and again and again, that's what you find with covenants. Abraham. God made covenant with Abraham right here in verse 18. And he makes this to him, and then we start out verse 16, or verse 1 of the 16th chapter. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children. She had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said unto Abram, 16:1, 16:2, Abraham, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And I don't know how much time has elapsed in between these 2 points.
Just a few verses.
I mean, you know, it's just about 3 lines worth of space there. I really, honestly, I don't think we're talking about a lot of time. There's some, but there's not a lot, okay? And he has just been out here, and God has shown him this vision, and he's done what God said. He laid out the sacrifices, and God says, look, here's what I'm going to do.
It says
Here's how
that-
I'm going to do
It
it.
says that Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael.
So that's a year.
Yeah.
If chapter 15, he was 85, then we're
Around
talking
that.
about a year. And keep in mind that it takes about 9 months for a child to grow. So we're talking anywhere from the next day to 3 months. I don't know. I mean, but you get the picture. It wasn't like God told him all this and then God just went away for 6 years. Well, maybe this makes sense now, you know? Go ahead, I'm
I
sorry.
think that, all right, I'm just having thoughts here. God told Abraham that he would come forth out of his own bowels.
Mhm.
Or not. God told Abraham that the heir would come out of thine own bowels.
Mhm.
In his mind, he's probably, that is what's happening here with Hagar, even though, but he didn't consult God. There was
He did.
he didn't consult God.
And look,
Why?
and look, and
Woman troubles.
look here, I'm gonna say this. I understand.
Listen to Eve too.
In the Old Testament, you're going to find situations where men had multiple wives.
Yeah.
But the Bible says from the beginning it was not so. God made a man and he made a woman, and therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. They two shall be one. I don't see a third one in there.
When
Okay,
did this
I know it
begin?
happened. I understand it happened. God doesn't even seem to be extremely upset about it a lot of times when it happens. But from the beginning, it was not so. Okay? That's what I got to say about.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, and I get it. But I don't think it was right, even if we're not talking about the fulfillment of this promise. So, anyway.
I'm not saying that it was right either.
No, I know that.
I'm just
I
saying
know.
that Abraham's probably looking at this like, because Sarah's not been mentioned yet.
Yeah, where's he looking though? Here's the problem.
Well, it's,
And see, that's why the covenant ends up being so weak. It's not on God's part. God knew all along what he was fixing to do. He knew. When he picked up Abraham over there in Ur of the Chaldees, said, that's my boy. He said, get up, let's go. He already knew. He already knew exactly how old Abraham was going to be when that child was born. He already knew.
Yeah.
Abraham's the one with the problem. Go ahead. You got something?
I do, but
Okay.
I don't want to hijack this thing.
No.
Going back over to verse 17 in chapter 15,
Mm-hmm.
my mind just keeps going back to those, in between those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Is the pieces the sacrifices that he's talking about right there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's-
Yeah, see,
I
he
just
laid-
keep going back because there's only 2 things mentioned in this. We had a furnace and we had the lamp, and the lamp was going in between pieces. So it
But
couldn't have been the
pieces-
furnace. It had to
Right.
have been the sacrifice. So the same as is the sacrifice.
Which the
was
sacrifice
pointing
is
to
the question.
Christ. But if it's pointing back to Christ, then that lamp he was walking amongst the pieces of the lamp, even there.
Even there.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's, I was just seeing this, I had never sold those pieces before, and that pieces,
Yeah.
it just keep, and I was like, he's talking about the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I see a parallel
Yeah.
between here when Abram goes to sleep.
Mhm.
Well, fast forward into the garden, and Jesus goes up to pray,
Uh-huh.
and he comes down, and what were the apostles doing?
Sleep.
They were sleeping. And the parallel I see is that man can't go far enough.
Right.
See, the apostles had already gone as far as they could go, and they fell asleep. But Jesus kept going. And here, Abram falls asleep, but
Because
Jesus
he's
kept
went as
going.
far as he can
He's
go.
gone as far as he could go, but the Lord keeps going and shows him that this is gonna happen. And you see, even there at Gethsemane, you see that parallel of, okay, man's already gone so far, he can't go anymore, he can't even keep his eyes open, but Christ keeps going.
And you also see the strength. See, I think of those as being the question. Okay? The sacrifice is the question.
Yes.
He's saying, Lord, show me. Here's my sacrifice. Show me. Show me what you're wanting me to understand. Well, the answer comes right down through the middle of the question, which is the promise.
Yeah.
There's the strength of it. Now, yes, he's telling him it's going to be this way, the old covenant relationship. He turns right around and makes covenant with Abraham. That extends down to Isaac, to Jacob, to the 12 tribes, all the way down. It comes to David, it comes to Solomon. You know, we get all of that, but all of this old covenant, starting really after Abraham. This is a little different covenant situation here. But there's a covenant, and then and God's working that with him. And he says, not only that, I'm going to bring it out here. And here, look, I'm going to bring a people out of Egypt, your descendants. And they're the ones that are going to bring about the birth of the Messiah. And then he is going to bring about the everlasting covenant. So, you know, he's showing him all out through here. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and it wasn't that, it was just the pieces, that I was
Yeah.
just the pieces, because I don't know how many times I've read that, but it just, right then, it stuck out to me. He's talking about the sacrifice.
Yes.
That lamp was going between the pieces. I just wanted to see if I was seeing that correctly. I don't know why.
And remember, in addition to that, a sacrifice is always something looking forward.
Yes.
Under the old covenant, and we don't do sacrifices like that in the new covenant, so it's always looking forward. Okay, when we go back to the garden, there was some animal that we talked about that was slain to cover their nakedness. That's a sacrifice. Their children did sacrifice. One of them slew an animal and brought the blood before the Lord. Another one brought the fruit of his hands. God had respect to the blood. He did not to the works. Okay? And it's always pointing toward Christ. That is always where the answer is. And that's what he's showing him, is what the answer is, and this is how it's going to be. So,
Wasn't trying to hijack,
that's not a hijack, that's fine.
That's,
Because I really think this 15th chapter is huge. Huge. I mean, you know, there's a lot of things that I don't want to sound like Trump. That's what I felt like right there when I said huge. It's huge. Please don't take that the wrong way. Okay? But this is massive. Let's use that word. It is of great importance.
Perfect.
It is of great importance. Okay?
Perfect conversation.
Y'all with me? Because it really shows God has a plan. It's nothing new. And even when we start looking at it, I mean, this lines up. This right here, I think, lines up. How much time have we got? We've got enough time. Go to Revelations. There is no telling what's laying in here.
No, it was stuck to the bottom of my shoe. I must
Oh.
have bashed a dead bird up there.
Well,
Awesome.
no, that's not.
There's no telling. Okay. So, some of this, y'all are going to have to. There's no way we've got time to go through all of this, but I'm going to go through some of this. I really want to start with chapter 4, but I'm not going to read chapter 4. But I believe in the book of Revelations. Okay, you have things that are past, present, future. Okay? I believe that to be true now. I think there's obviously things past. I think there's obviously things that are going on now that are contained in here. And I think there's still some things to come. Okay? It was that way when John wrote the book. Okay? And I believe that even when we start reading this, there's things that go so far back that the only way that they can be known is by revelation. Okay? Because I think there's things in the book of Revelation that deal with things that happened before this world was. All right? I believe the 4th chapter is one of those things. I believe leading into the 5th chapter, you have the same situation. Okay? And actually the 6th chapter, in my opinion, is where you actually start getting into us coming along. All right? And that's just a quick, throw it out there in front of you. So, but let's pick up in verse 5. And he says, and I saw, and again, this is John on the Isle of Patmos. He's caught up. He's being able to see things past, present, future. Okay? I believe now he's seeing backwards. He said, I saw on the right hand of him that sat on the throne. Now, him that sat on the throne, if you go back to chapter 4, you find this to be the emerald throne. This is the one that out of the throne proceeded lightnings, thunderings, voices, plural. Okay? So we're talking about a throne, and it is plural, which is the Godhead. Okay? And huh?
What chapter are you in?
That's back in chapter
He's
4.
going back and forth.
I'm bouncing back and forth. We're 4 and 5. We're 4 and 5. Stay with me. Stay with me.
Make it clear.
We're 4 and 5. Stay with me. That's as clear as it
You
gets.
said verse 5, but you started reading chapter 5.
I did. Verse 5, chapter 4. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay? So this is where, and there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And I think you get the same picture. Okay? And this is before the foundation of the world. Okay? You also see in verse 6 of the 4th chapter, there was a throne with a sea of glass like unto crystal. You follow on over into the 18th chapter, I think, is where it defines the sea of glass, or the waters. There are multitudes, peoples, nations, and tongues. God's laying all of this out in his mind. And boy, I don't know if that's the right way to put that. Okay? But it's the best way I know to put it. Okay? These things are happening. This in my way of thinking is what y'all have heard termed in the past the deal of God. Okay? Now, if it's the determinate counsel of God, then you and I got nothing to do with it. It's God making the determination. But God, in his 3 persons, has to agree. Okay? That's just his nature. But to agree, the things have to be put forward. Therefore, from the throne, you hear lightnings and thunderings, which is the voice of God. God, and it's not that God is mad at God. They're just laying the plan out, if that makes sense. Okay? Now we're out of chapter 4. We're going to chapter 5. He's still seeing these things. He said, I saw on the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within, and on the backside sealed with 7 seals. Now, this is just, and if you don't see it, it ain't going to hurt you. But Brother Ramsey pounded into me for 4 or 5 weeks in a row. Who did he take it from? Who did he take it from? And I'm going, well, he had to take it from the Father because it's the Son. Okay? No, you ain't got it yet. And he was right. But anyway, we're going to hold that for a second because we need to get down to it. He said, I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof. Okay? I believe this book to be more than a lot of people make it out to be. I believe it's the destiny of man. I believe it's all of it. I believe it's the plan. I believe everything that God has just said in his determinate counsel is included in this book. But it's sealed up, completely sealed up. And it can't be anything done with it, okay, yet. Because in verse 3 it says, no man in heaven nor in earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. Now, some would think, well, if you're talking about men, they're in heaven, earth, and all this. The time has not begun yet, okay? And this is one of those things that may sound as far out there as it can possibly be. But time does not begin till God said, let there be light.
Right.
Okay? So at this point, I won't say at this time, at this point that this is written, time is not a constraint. Okay? And God is not even today bound like we are inside of time. God is eternal. He always was, He always is, He always will be. And it is my personal opinion that all three of those are simultaneous.
Yes.
He can't be any other way and still be God. Okay? So when we say that God is from everlasting to everlasting, for us, we can't comprehend that. But with God, it's nothing because He's not bound like we are by day and night and things of that nature. He's not bound by time. Okay? So when it says that God looked in heaven, He looked in earth, God can look from the beginning to the end and never move one iota. And when you really get down to it, I really think that's a whole lot more about what it means over there in the Revelation when it says to him a day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day. Time does not matter to God. Okay? He's declared the end from the beginning. He knew it. He's in it. He's always present. Okay? And that gets into a whole lot of stuff and it'll twist your head around if you ain't careful, so don't freak out about it. Okay? But he found that there was no man that was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. Okay? This lines up perfectly with the idea of a covenant. Which of us can fulfill the covenant of God that God has established with us? None. Nobody ever has. I mean, you think about the relationship that you have with God, the covenant that you're supposed to be in with God as a church member. Have you lived up to it?
No.
Please nobody say yes. You know, I mean, we know better. We know better. We failed. We failed. Okay? So that's why nobody could take this and open it up, because none of us were perfect. All right? And what did John do? He said, I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open and to read the book, neither to look thereon. Okay? They couldn't even comprehend what was on the outside, because it is written within and on the backside, which would be the outside when it's rolled up, sealed with 7 seals. They couldn't even comprehend what was on the outside.
Explain that book.
Explain the book? It's a roll.
How?
No, it's not this. It's not this.
Scroll.
It's a scroll. Okay? Written within and on the back side, which would be the outside,
Yeah.
and it's sealed with 7 seals.
Yeah.
Right there. Okay? That's how I can comprehend it.
Okay, that's all right.
I mean, because it's a scroll. Because at the time we're talking, books like we now have in this form were non-existent. They were scrolls.
Okay.
Okay, so it would be a scroll. Okay? He said, I wept much because no man was able to open or to read the book, neither to look thereon. And one of the elders saith unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. Now I'm going to pause right here. And y'all know the answer to this one because it's right below it. When did that happen? When did that elder tell John, weep not? Because the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. When was the book opened? By Christ. Okay? We know it's by Christ.
There's a beginning?
He said, and I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne.
Well, he had to have been after he ascended.
No, no.
Before time.
Yes.
It was before time.
Y'all remember
Oh,
the
okay.
throne over there in chapter 4?
Yeah.
Who all was there? That was the determinate counsel of God. It had to be God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit. And he looked, and in the midst of the throne, still there, still in the midst of the throne, he saw something. What he saw, in the midst of the throne of the four beasts and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb as it had been slain. Already done.
For the foundation.
And he's never even left the throne yet. Okay? There's the determinate counsel of God. He's already made the decision. And he's never stepped out yet and said, let us make man, other than, and I don't feel like this is the best way to say it, but it's the only way I know to comprehend it. In his mind, he has said these things. That's the determinate counsel. That's what requires this scroll, this destiny of man. Okay? But before any actual physical manifestation of those things takes place, he's already took it. He's already said, I will. Okay? And it says, he saw in the midst of the throne of the four beasts, in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns, 7 eyes, which is the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. They're both still on the throne. Okay? And the Spirit's there too. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts, 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having harps, golden phials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. Okay? They sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred, tongue, and people, and nation. Again, we get this whole picture. Okay, because this is from the perspective of God. And he sees the end from the beginning. But here's Christ, still on the throne, still there with God, and he takes all of this and says, I'll do it. And he stood as a lamb slain from before the foundation of the world. Okay, so before Genesis 1:1, this happened. If you want to put it in chronological order. Okay? Go, Joe.
Okay. How can it be the prayers of the saints if it's never happened?
Because
He's God.
God is not bounded by time. God has already declared the end from the beginning. He is the eternal, existent God. He always was, He always is, He always will be. God is not bound by time, and this is not from our perspective, even though John sees it. This is God's perspective. This is eternity past, where God has already declared the end, because He's already there, in my opinion. I know.
And he sees that from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely He does.
Okay,
Yes.
think about it like this. Eternity, this is the only way I can see it. Eternity is, because even when we describe eternity, we still use the terms that we know with time.
Right?
So in eternity, there's not a beginning, there's not an end, there's not a now, it just is.
Right.
And so, we talk about those that have gone on that are waiting for us. They're not waiting for anything. Because
Really not.
it's eternity.
Past, present, future.
Past, present, and future is all one thing.
Yes. See,
But I'm trying to find out the prayers of the saints. At what time did he see that? I mean, it wasn't no time for him. Did he see that it was going to happen? Was it going to happen?
sure.
Okay. And he saw it when it was happening,
Yes.
all through time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. That's actually correct. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
This might be stupid. But I me sit over here. If you see me digging, that's what I'm digging.
Okay.
Jesus said he would do it.
Yes.
He says this to God, I will go.
Yes.
I will be the lamb.
Right.
So this, is he promising, is he doing a covenant, can that be between Jesus and God?
And the Spirit, yes.
Yes.
It is a covenant.
Because he's
But the
saying,
distinction of that covenant, as opposed to a covenant that God makes with man, is that with man, we're involved and we mess up.
right,
With God, it's God, and there is no failure.
but it's still the same concept of, there had to have been, because
Yes.
he had to say, I will go,
There was that.
in order for
yes.
this to all,
And therein is the strength of it, the promise. Okay? There is a part on God. God is the lawgiver. Christ is, I mean, we could spend all night just saying the different things, that offices that he takes. But there's also then the office of the Spirit. Okay? So, I mean, and there's multiple offices that you can actually find with the Spirit. There's multiple offices you can find with the Father. So each one has a part in this that they play.
I just think it's interesting to see that transpire between the
Them.
Godhead.
Yes, yes. And that's what you actually see in 4 and 5.
And to me, God the Father and God the Son are much easier for me to understand than God the Spirit. Because the Spirit, you can't define it.
But here's the problem. God is a spirit.
He is.
And the reason that it's easier for us to think of the Father
Because
and
we
the
think of him
Son
being,
is because we put a corporeal existence to that.
yes.
Which is correct to do with Christ because he did, in the fullness of time, take upon him the likeness of sinful flesh, yet without sin. Okay? But the Father never has.
But we see him.
So the Father,
But he said, let us make man in our image.
yes, Joe, and I explained that to you last year, and you wouldn't agree with me, so. I explained to you, it's not a physical image. It cannot be because God is a spirit. God is a spirit. It is a spiritual image that man is made in because there is no physical image. Because God is a spirit. Just, yeah, you're right. I agree with you. Okay, we have dove off into some deep waters tonight, y'all.
What was your answer to Brother Ramsey whenever he would ask you who took the book?
Yeah.
Oh, I kept saying no, because Christ had to take it from the Father because he's here, but he's the one on the throne. Right? But to John, I mean, I got so full, it's such a blessing. Where was Christ at when he took it?
On the throne.
In the midst of the throne, right there in the middle of it. He was still there. See, this is not, because a lot of times we would line things up and we say, okay, the Father said this how it's got to be, so Christ has to step over here, and then he comes back and he says, yes, I'll take this. No, they were still there together.
So he took it from himself.
In effect, yes. Yes.
No,
They agree.
Swain took it from himself.
Yes.
If you want.
I mean, he assumed.
Yes.
What we're doing,
Or did he take it from all three?
what we're doing is we're trying to, again, put a corporal, physical existence into something that's really probably not there. Okay? When it says he took this, I think what it means literally is he assumed that. He said, I will do it. That's what you get.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a physical reaching out, grabbing hold of a physical piece of paper that's physically sealed with physical seals and taking it and starting to break open the seals. I don't think that's physically what happened because there is no physical at this point.
So we had to give them
Okay.
vision so we can understand it.
Yes,
In a way
yeah.
that-
I mean, it's pictures
for us to
It,
understand.
it's just like when we go to
It's images.
Revelations, we get to chapter 4, and we go, oh, all this is symbolic, 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 and then we see a throne or the holy city of the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. We go, no, that's in our minds, it's literally going to have 12 foundations, and it's literally going to have 12 physical gates, and it's lit. Go look at it.
1,500 square miles?
Just go look at it, okay? What is it built of? What is it built of?
You said the saints, didn't you?
Well, I did. I just want to see if you remembered, but yes, absolutely. We are the lively stones, and that's what it is built of.
Right.
The 12 foundations are the 12 apostles. Okay? That's the
I
foundation of the
understand
church.
that, yeah.
It is a symbol.
But how can it be 1,500 square miles of people?
It's a whole bunch of people.
It's a lot of people.
Stones.
There's a lot of stones.
It's gonna be packed in like sardines.
Now let me go just one step farther with this, and I know this isn't the
Come on.
direction you want to go.
No.
So, when you get over to chapter 6,
Yes.
and you have the seals,
Yes.
really and truly, each one of those deal with the completion of the promise, because all of those had to occur in order for the fullness of Christ to come about.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Sort of.
yeah, kind of. Yes. Yeah. I mean, when you start opening the first seal, what you see is Christ stepping
You
forward.
see Christ, you see Satan, you see
You
justice.
see Satan stepping
death,
forward, which
hell.
is the need for
The
all
same.
these other things that follow along.
Yeah.
You got
Yes.
into that last year, didn't you? How
Little
so
bit,
far
yeah.
with that?
Yeah, I did.
Him did the first 4.
Yes, he did. I remember that now.
Yeah, I did the first 4. I sure did. Huh? I wonder why.
The seals.
The 4 seals. That's 4 horsemen. Yeah.
The wrestlers.
Huh?
The wrestlers.
Yeah. No, the old football players from Notre Dame.
Yeah, all right. The
No.
floor.
But
Come on.
I mean, y'all see the pictures, right? I mean, y'all all see the pictures, and they're talking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and boy, they're getting ready to ride because the world's just about to. No, go read it.
There ain't no horses in heaven?
I didn't say that.
Yeah. Well, they came
The
out.
saints are going to come riding on horses one day after a while, so I'm going to say, yeah, I didn't say
Well,
that.
I've heard a lot of preachers try to preach a whole lot of dogs in heaven before.
Anyway,
In heaven?
Yeah.
if we're not done, we need to be. We're starting to get dogs in heaven. I don't believe we need to be teaching about no Disney movies or whoever it is that made that. So anyway, so back to the original question. Okay, you can have both points being made in the same idea. Is that?
Yeah.
I mean, does that make better sense now? It doesn't automatically have to be one or the other. You've got to look at the end of it. And if you see the end of it, then you can come back and make the inference to what it is. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. All right,
Do you have to have a covenant with the promise?
do you have to have a covenant with the promise?
Well, I was reading in Hebrews, I asked you some last week where, like chapter 6.
Uh-huh.
Basically, if you go down, you can read some of that, but it was, where's it at? It was saying, surely blessed and I'll bless thee, and multiply thee, I'll multiply thee. Basically, we're talking about Abraham.
Uh-huh.
And then, for the men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmations to them to the end of all strife, wherein God willing more abundantly to shew unto the heirs of our promise the immutability of his counsel confirmed it by an oath.
Right.
So is that proving the promise? That basically.
That's his promise. That's his promise of his promise.
Promise of his promise.
Yes, yeah. And the immutability means the unchangeableness of his
He
counsel.
can't lie.
And what that is referencing back to is what we were looking at in chapter 5 of Revelation, or chapter 4, or 4 and 5, okay? That is his counsel. That is God's determination. Before the foundation of the world, this is what's going to happen. It is locked in. It is not going to change because it is by promise. Okay? Now, I'll give you this and then we'll move on from it. For right now, understand the promise is the strength. The covenant is the means whereby God brings about the fulfillment of the promise, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. Is everybody good? Okay.
Good study.
Any other questions? Okay, we're gonna stop then. We'll pick up next week, and probably we'll go on up through right before Christmas. Christmas is on a Monday, isn't it? So we will probably get the week before Christmas, as far as I know, unless, you know, if it's a situation where everybody goes, hey, I can't be here that one, and half of y'all are gonna be gone, we can take off. But if you can be here, we'll plan to be here up to the Monday before Christmas, and then we'll take off Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And then we can start back the second Monday in January. Does that sound okay to everybody? Right? I mean, that's sort of what I'm thinking now. And of course, if, you know, comes a freak snowstorm or something like that, we'll probably leave off. But, you know, if somebody gets sick, you know, I mean, we're gonna be still somewhat flexible, but that's sort of my plan right now, so. All right, any other questions? Any comments, anything?